Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mainstream Indie Music Podcast. As the title suggests, we always talk about indie music, especially from the early 2000s, but we do branch out into history, and we try to get into newer indie music as well, which is something I really want to kind of shift attention to maybe in the next upcoming episodes. But this episode, I always reference what's supposedly called on this channel the Mount Rushmore of indie music. I've mentioned people like Ben Gibbard from Death Cab for Cutie, David Byrne, and this week is no exception. Probably adding to that collection is none other than James Mercer from the Shins. To begin this week's episode, though, have you ever met somebody where their mind just cannot stay focused in this reality? You know, they think differently, they act differently, and maybe they have a lot of energy or maybe they're laid back, but they just tend to think outside of the box. James Mercer definitely fits that bill. He constantly has said time and time again that his head is in the clouds, that he likes to think differently and do things differently. And a lot of it, I feel at least, has to do with his upbringing, where in one hand he was raised in essentially a military household. His father was in the military, and so he lived abroad for most of his life, though he lived in Hawaii, but he did move and go to school in other countries. But on the flip side, James has constantly, time and time again, stated how close he was to his father, how his father really influenced him with music, because he said, yes, his dad was in the military, but his dad also would perform live shows. You know, he'd play guitar and sing in front of crowds of people. So you kind of had the yin and the yang. You had both sides of the coin here, where one side you can imagine just being strict and having a very structured life, but on the other side, encouraged to explore that artistic side of you. And it really did pay off, because right away, James did go to college, and he went to college to be a chemist. He said he was doing very well, but then he dropped out, stating that although chemistry was interesting and he was doing fine in his classes, he found it to just be too grounded, and he wanted to let his mind be set free. That leads to him joining the underground indie scene at the time, because this is the mid-90s. Indie is not a thing yet. Grunge has just started to die down a little bit. Classic rock is always there. You're kind of entering the pop-punk era, the beginnings of it, mixed with some ska. So alternative was not a thing. You know, Radiohead, I guess, would be kind of the only thing that was up and coming at the time. And so James decides to go for it anyway. You know, he wants to explore and do things. So at first he bounces around the local indie scene. He would join a few bands here and there. In fact, it leads to one of his bands that he joined doing pretty well. That band being called Flake, or Flake Music. In fact, their album, which was released in the early to mid-90s, caught the attention of Modest Mouse, who asked them to tour with them. Now again, this theme of James' mind constantly moving, constantly thinking, comes up again, because even though Flake was doing pretty well, again, getting the attention of a major band, who sadly we have yet to reference on this channel, we really got to make a music about them, he wanted more. So James still started to work on another side project while being with Flake Music. This side project started off by just restructuring chord structures for popular pop songs at the time, but it turned into, hey, we kind of got something special here. And essentially, it turned into the Shins. The Shins really took off with a bang. More than likely what happened was they had been working on this side project, well, quote-unquote side project, for so long that they had so much material to kind of use straight off the bat. Oh Inverted World and Shoots Too Narrow were released in 2001 and 2003, and, instantly caught the attention of a lot of that underground alternative music artists, but more specifically, their song New Slang caught the attention of Zach Braff and other producers on Garden State and was used in the film. This skyrocketed the Shins in popularity. Now, once again, James was not done. Even though he had the Shins on top of the indie world at the time, nearing the late 2000s, he had been collaborating with another major artist on a separate Sparkle Horse album. That artist was Danger Mouse. James was so impressed and liked working with Danger Mouse so much, whom we've also talked about on this channel, that they decided to take a leap and start yet another side project, Broken Bells. Now here's where things get really interesting, because I'm sure some Shins fans think that this was the end of the Shins, and some Shins fans seeing this as James Mercer's saving grace. Because around this time, James had been saying how kind of tired of the touring life with the Shins had been going, and he was frankly done with them. I think more than likely I'm kind of on the latter side of that fence. I think if he would have never collaborated, if he would have never formed Broken Bells with Danger Mouse, he would have just quit the Shins altogether and they never would have continued making music as a group. However, I do understand fans who take the first side of it, that say like the Shins as we knew it ended at that moment. Because when James came back from making music and touring with Broken Bells, he completely scrapped and brought in new bandmates. Now, it's true, their sound did change a little bit, but for the most part, to me, they still sound like the Shins. Ports of Morrow was released after the Shins' quote-unquote reunion, and then Heartworms was released in 2017. Since then, James and Danger Mouse have reconvened and made 2 more albums, including one that was released in 2022 for Broken Bells. The Shins have released some singles here and there, but I think in James' personal life has taken such a big toll. I mean, hopefully the Shins come back full force. But sadly, one of the Shins band members passed away, and then one of his longtime friends, his friend being Neil Langford, who was all the way back in the Flakes band from the early 90s, also passed away. Now that's just conjecture. Maybe he'll still make new music with the Shins. Now let's get to our indie iceberg rating. Although the Shins, probably the band name is heard, I think if you were to play a song for people, I'd say it'd be 50-50. So while I wouldn't put them right at the top of the 2 mainstream category, I wouldn't put them super down in the indie charts. What do you guys think?